You've got a client asking for reassurance. So with ICBT, what you can do is let's notice all the information that the client could have used, or if I'm talking to your audience and they have OCD, let's look at all the information you have that you could have used, and let's figure out like what happened to that process where you didn't use that or it wasn't enough.
Welcome to OCD Whisperer podcast. Today with me, I have Mike Parker, who is a licensed clinical social worker in private practice in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He's the host of the YouTube channel OCD Space, which focuses primarily on the ICBT approach to OCD treatment. He enjoys providing ICBT as an option for clients with OCD, as well as helping other therapists in the field learn the approach. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Christina. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So today, what I would love to do is actually kind of have like ICBT 101. If we can spend a little time, and I've had some episodes before and, kind of launched into different facets or pieces, but I think it'd be great to have one now and kind of go over really like, what is it really, right? Like, what are we really treating? How does this thing work? What are we doing?
I love it. I love getting to talk about this. Yeah. And it's such a good point you made, because you, myself, and a lot of others have been slowly learning the treatment, incorporating it into our practice. And that's been, 2 or 3 year process for a lot of people. And so we've had various points along the way where we kind of described it a certain way. But we're really at a point now, I feel like, for a lot of people where the dust is kind of settled and you've been able to grasp all the different concepts. And it is a great time to be like, let's revisit that question. What is ICBT?
Yeah.
So, I guess the way first of all, I would say part of the difficulty for clients, for other therapists and practitioners, is that it is very different from ERP and a CBT. It's a more typical CBT presentation. And so there is a lot to learn. And there's a lot of hurdles there for people to understand it. But, hopefully having yourself talk about it and me and other people, like, we can make that easier than it was for us. So I guess the one thing that I've realized, for me, the one key difference, the most important difference, is this idea of obsessional doubt. And obsessional doubt is a core process identified in OCD when you're doing ICBT. It's a core thought process. The other thing I would add is, with ICBT, if you've been doing ERP as a client, as a therapist, and you're switching to ICBT, it's sort of like you have like a really great recipe that you love. And then someone else says, well, here's this other recipe. And if you make it right, it'll taste exactly the same, And so, but you can't mix them. You'll get to the same point, but you have to follow that recipe or that recipe. And it is like that with ICBT. It's like you kind of have to learn, you have to get absorbed in a completely new recipe and use those tools and stick with that for a little while and see how it goes. So obsessional doubt is essential to ICBT. And what we're going to find is when someone who has been doing a different treatment encounters obsessional doubt or the word, they're not really going to know what to do with that. They're going to say, oh, is that a compulsion? Is that a obsession? Is that an intrusive thought? What is that? And what I have found is it is none of the above. So basically, you have to take that CBT conceptualization where you've got trigger, thought, feeling, compulsion, and then it's sort of a cycle over and over again. You have to actually wipe that from your mind and say, you know what, I don't need that for ICBT. It's going to be completely different. And what we'll find with obsessional doubt is it's its own thing. It's a thought process. And it's basically the idea that someone with OCD knows something, but they don't really trust themselves enough to stick with what they know. And they feel this need to doubt it, to question it, to dismiss it, and then to go further and look for more information than they have. And it's a process in ICBT, that's the repeat process that we're looking at. We're looking at, okay, you had this information, you had this knowledge, and then you chose to question, reject it for some reason. And now you're in an imagined place and you're constructing a new story that doesn't have a lot of reality-based information on it and has a lot of other stuff that kind of came from your mind in it. And so we're just looking at obsessional doubt with ICBT and we're saying, why is that happening? And then how do we help the client to not do that? And, so an example might be, if you have a client asking you for reassurance in a session, if you are taking a strict ERP approach, you would say that's a compulsion. Our job is to stop doing the compulsion. And then eventually, like when you experience life without the compulsion, you'll get some new learning. You'll realize like you didn't need to avoid, you didn't need to do a compulsion. And then your brain and your thoughts and your beliefs will kind of like rewire themselves as you go through life without this protective behavior. With ICBT, we're going to say, let's figure out why you asked for reassurance, because I don't have any more information than you have. And you're asking me a question. And, and with ICBT, I think it's very helpful to recognize, like, if a client has an obsession and you don't have that obsession, you can definitely use yourself as a model to say, why don't I do what this client's doing? And that's perfectly valid with ICBT. We can say clients with OCD can get to that same place. And so we would work on what happened where you didn't trust something. And then you, for some reason, felt like you should ask me that question. Let's dive into that and let's figure out how you can start to answer these questions by yourself. And so for a lot of clients, that is just extremely attractive because there are a lot of clients that really want to know what's going on. They want to understand why they've been doing certain things. They want to understand their own mind. And the idea of just don't ask for reassurance, for some clients, it'll work, but sometimes it won't actually. Sometimes it'll be like, I guess I stopped doing the compulsion, but I still feel confused.
Right. Or I still think this stuff in the background, or maybe I'm just not saying it, but it's still in my head, or I still, go to these places. So there's still, at least that's what I keep hearing.
Yeah.
Over. And I mean, myself included, like I still would have a certain thought process that would happen and just didn't have a language or a way to really understand, and would say, okay, well, globally, we'll just say that's me ruminating and let's just find ways to not engage, or to give ourselves like a reminder, like, okay, I've thought about this, 1,000 times. There's no answer, so let's drop it. Versus here, you're saying, well, let's actually understand why are you even asking that in the first place? Like, what's driving that?
Yeah, it's really cool. It's just, there's so much to dive into there. You've got a client asking for reassurance. So with ICBT, what you can do is let's notice all the information that the client could have used, or if I'm talking to your audience and they have OCD, let's look at all the information you have that you could have used, and let's figure out what happened to that process where you didn't use that, or it wasn't enough. And we're going to notice the behavior of obsessional doubt. And then we're going to recognize that the client actually has a lot of reasoning that goes into why they chose to not trust the information that they have available. And we can get someone to stop asking a reassurance question by helping them realize that they had all these reasons for doubting. And those reasons were due to flawed OCD logic. And there is all this information that they know that's reality-based information, and they have to stay in that world and just reason in that world.
So with that in mind, then I guess, what would you say are some common things from the lens of ICBT that you've noticed that folks tend to do? Or what is some of that reasoning where, if you, I guess, see it or uncover it, right, that, like you mentioned, the word resolve, right, that we can then actually end that process?
That's a great question. So one thing that we'll find that clients tend to use a lot of with ICBT is internal information, a lot of the quote unquote evidence comes from inside. So someone may think that a sensation in their body is reason to go into obsessional doubt. Someone may think a certain emotion that they're experiencing is a reason to go into obsessional doubt. Someone may even think that having a doubt itself is a reason to doubt. In the case of relationship OCD, for example, if a client starts doubting the relationship because of OCD reasons, and then they look back on the fact that they doubted and they say, oh, if I was happy, I wouldn't have doubted in the first place. They're suddenly now using this OCD thought process as its own evidence, and it's this repeat loop. So, that's one thing I would say is a lot of clients really get convinced by internal evidence that convinces them the obsessional experience is real and it's really happening. The other thing that happens is someone with OCD really struggles with self-knowledge. It's, for some people, and there's going to be almost like a sort of a void there of where you should sort of know things about yourself. You haven't spent a lot of time really trusting information about yourself, because on a daily basis, there's so much information you could glean. You could see what you did with your day. You could see what people told you about yourself. You could see the promotion you got. You could, whatever it could be, that could all be used to build a story about yourself based on reality. And someone with OCD will often not acknowledge any of that information. It doesn't fit in with the feared story they have about themselves. And so they don't want to trust that information. It always feels like that might be a lie or that might not be accurate. And then you end up kind of like a blank slate. And when you are a blank slate, lots of things can suddenly seem like they apply to you. And so if someone has harm OCD, one of the things you'll often hear is oh yeah, this true crime episode, this person just killed their whole family. What if that is me? And that's where we'll see, that's another reasoning error where you're using out of context information to support your doubt. And we get at that by noticing well, that's not you, actually. that person has nothing to do with who you are. Let's figure out who you are, because you haven't been doing that.
Yeah. And you also hit on something really important that I just heard, which is, and I know for anybody listening, one of the things that came to mind as well, but I did read this or CDC said, or, well, germs exist, or, well, we all know that, dogs, go pee and poo outside and then their owners clean stuff up, but stuff is there, right. So there is this interesting element where it's almost like the sprinkling of things from reality and things we do know. So it's not like we're completely irrational, but there is a point where when you're using that in a really congruent way that's in context, and you're kind of synthesizing everything that's available to you right now to evaluate this moment and then what to do.
Yeah.
Versus what you just said is, oh, I'm more pulling on things I know or that I've seen through all sorts of different places, et cetera, but I'm taking it really out of context and kind of getting stuck into an out of context possibility, to the point where we can convince ourselves that, I don't know, maybe I could be this horrible person, or inversely, well, I'm just being this extra careful person and others aren't being as, careful as me.
I think one thing we'll see is when you have OCD, you're very much drawn to thinking about possibilities, and then you end up thinking about general facts, not facts that are necessarily relevant to you in the moment, but general facts. And those feel very convincing because, a statement like germs exist is undeniably true. But then when you say, because of that, I should worry about everything I come into contact with, then you're way out of context. And the moment no longer matters to you. And it's really the general fact over, what this moment that I'm in right now.
Yeah, that's actually interesting. So with ICBT, we're getting to a place of where we're saying, okay, let's slow down and really look at this back end thought process that's happening, that's leading you here. And like you said, kind of focusing more on this fear of who I could be. Well, I guess, a thought that comes to mind or a question, because I've certainly heard this a lot. I'm gonna guess you probably have too, but what do you do when people have made mistakes, right? Like they did actually do the thing that they're now so overly excessively concerned about and just have not been able to move on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, honestly, I find that with someone with OCD, when when the thing they're concerned about actually happens, they're typically able to deal with it like no problem. And I'm always amazed by that. And I think a lot of therapists are shocked by that. They're like, I've been worried about you all these years, and you just had it happen, and you're acting like it was no big deal. So I think even with something like dog poop, right? Like our clients can smell and see dog poop when it actually happens. And so that's part of trusting your senses. Recognizing your senses will tell you when something's happening. You don't have to go like overusing them and looking. But yeah, this idea that the thing is that what I think tends to really distress clients, if you're really looking at things from an ICBT standpoint, is just the inability to trust. It's a very unsettling experience. It's like I find this all the time with clients. They will tell me, I know something. Like I know it. Like, and if I actually ask point blank, like, is that true? Are you a serial killer? Are you this? No. The answer is no, and they know that. And so the really unsettling part of having OCD is having something and feeling like you can't do anything about it. And so I find that much more the target of treatment than necessarily like getting involved in the possibility, because if the possibility happens, you'll be fine. You'll handle it. Like I'm not even worried about it. Let's figure out why you're in so much distress all the time and why this sucks to have OCD, and it really is this experience of not trusting and doubting from an ICBT standpoint.
And would you say that ICBT would also kind of say, hey, let's maybe even look at like what are some earlier memories or when some of the stuff started, or some of the ways that you're perceiving this? Because it's not like it's not like we're born with this innate reasoning, right? It's like throughout our life, whatever it is, whether it's the immediate home, the environment we're in at the time, whatever later on that we're picking up from the world and all the different messaging and however we're interpreting it, especially, when you have your little child brain is going to see things one way, you get a little older, you see it another way, you get a little older still, you see it another way. So, our thought processes, it evolves, it changes, but some things, and I'm only asking because like I have people who come to mind that when we've pause and ask, they'll say like, yeah, when I was a kid, like I saw this commercial and I remembered this thing that really kind of stuck in my head about like, oh, I have to use this thing to have this cleanliness piece, or my parents were really rigid. And so the whole concept of rules and this rigidity really kind of got stuck in the brain. But what would you say?
Yeah, I would say that is all open game. And that's, to me, from my experience, that's a big shift in our field that we typically were saying, from my experience, this is all random. Don't go looking for any reasons why you have this obsession, because there's nothing to be found there. And what we're going to find with ICBT is we do go there. We want to say like, yeah, tell me about that commercial you saw when you were a kid. Tell me about this. Tell me about that. And let's look at how this all got built together and how it got turned into a story for you. And what we see when we see those earlier experiences, we can start to see how long the client has been telling themselves an obsessional story about themselves and about their situation, because it was even present there. Like, I still remember that commercial. I still remember my mom saying this to me. And so what we see is it was all logged in there and then all put together. But if we go back, we can start to see that this actually never meant that you should be locked into never-ending doubt. Like this, all these reasons and all these experiences, we're going to find out that they don't mean you shouldn't trust yourself. Because mom said this to you, but she may have had OCD, but if she didn't have OCD, she probably didn't end up doing all the worrying and all the compulsive behaviors that you ended up doing after you got her advice.
Right. Or like inversely, if your mom is somebody who tends to worry so much, but you are absorbing it, and now you're using that as your data point to infer things inaccurately versus recognizing, well, no, that's just my mom tends to worry a lot and we're separate and I don't need to take that on or internalize it this way.
Yeah, I do that even more than before since learning ICBT. Helping clients really talk about their childhood experience, really talk about their parents, not to criticize or denigrate their parents. In most cases, parents were like great and loved them, but maybe did worry a lot, maybe did say certain things over and over again, and that was really unhelpful. And so it's so good to go into that with your adult mind and see what your parents told you and be able to say, well, they shouldn't have said that. Like, that was not helpful. Like, and they didn't know I was struggling. They didn't see that I was taking this and turning it into OCD, but I did. And so there's a lot to be found in those childhood messages that a lot of people receive.
Well, and the thing is, as we're talking about this, now I want to ask the question, because anybody listening could be like, well, wait a minute, are we getting to some psychodynamic, like all talking and processing stuff? I thought we said that that's actually not great for OCD. So let's clarify, like what kind of therapy is ICBT?
Yeah.
It has CBT in it, cognitive behavioral therapy, for anybody who doesn't know, and I stands for inference-based. But if you can tell us a little bit about that.
In my opinion, the main reason to stay away from psychodynamic therapy is that it is founded somewhat on an idea of an unconscious. And this idea that like you act a certain way, but like there's actually like more of a hidden self inside of you that like is driving this and you're not even aware of it.
Yeah, I guess that was really scary. Immediately, like, what?
I don't know what to say anymore, right? Like, I think everybody listening knows how that sounds, right? And
yes.
How OCD is going to take that. So
immediately.
Yeah. So, it's one of those things like, it might be so many people benefit from that kind of approach, but it would work if you're able to take something like that with a grain of salt, because that's really how it's meant to be. Like, Freud wasn't saying that you could secretly be a serial killer even though you've like never hurt someone before. Like, there's no way that was the point of that like theory, right? But OCD will take it that way. And we just want to watch out for like this focus on the unconscious, like that it really, for one, a lot of it is like hasn't really stood the test of time in terms of like really focusing on that, like in therapy. Like it doesn't seem like that's necessarily that helpful for a lot of people. And then, two, like, we have shifted towards, behavioral approaches, CBT, cognitive approaches, and not talking about that stuff so much. So I don't know. I feel like I'm kind of like losing track of thought right now.
Well, for ICBT, I mean, that was my biggest question very early on, is like, okay, is it a behavioral therapy? Is it a cognitive therapy? Is it a metacognitive? What is it? And I think from what I've understood so far is it's really more of a cognitive approach, because once you understand kind of the distorted reasoning processes, like the way that you think about things that leads you to arrive to these conclusions you arrive at, and see, kind of like cognitive distortions in standard CBT, like catastrophizing or personalization, right? So if you can understand and see this whole thought process and recognize the difference between, like all the times where you don't do that, and then you do that really only when your specific, triggers and vulnerabilities arise in OCD, and then suddenly you're doing something different. It sounds like and mimics kind of standard analysis process, but really it's doing something quite different. And so my understanding is that if you can understand it and learn what that is, then you'll start to essentially behave differently.
Yeah. I think you got it exactly on the head. That's how I think of it too. Like, it's primarily a cognitive therapy. And the focus really is when you're looking into reasons, when you're looking into the past, when you're looking into messaging you received, we're just trying to figure out why you doubt. We're trying to figure out why, when you get information, you reject it, and why you think certain things are not trustworthy pieces of information, and like you should instead think about what ifs, think about possibilities. And so that's really the focus. And that's really the big shift. When people think of CBT, just doing talk therapy, CBT, it's got a mixed kind of reputation. Some people think it's just not helpful at all to even do any kind of talk therapy like that. Some people think it has some benefit. But ICBT has changed it, because the thing with CBT is it was looking at the facts. It was trying to say, like, is this thing actually possible? What's the probability of this actually happening?
Yeah.
And it didn't take into account the client is obsessionally doubting if they have OCD. And so you're going to talk about this information, and meanwhile, there's going to be this obsessional doubt process happening on their end. And as a just CBT therapist who didn't know about obsessional doubt, you're not attuned to them doing that. So you're just going through this like routine, and you can't do anything about the fact that they're rejecting the thinking that you're trying to encourage in the CBT session. And so now ICBT is like, well, let's actually focus on the doubt part, and let's just figure out why you reject information, why you don't trust it. Oftentimes it's like, now I just immediately go into my imagination, because I've been doing this for so long. I don't even notice I'm like not trusting anything or doubting anything. I'm just like living in my imagination, and the imagination and reality has just become kind of like a blurred experience at this point. But we're kind of like trying to wind that back and figure out, this all started with a doubt. Let's figure out why you did that.
Yeah, I think you nailed it on the head too. That's exactly right. I think for folks living with OCD, it's that when this all first started and this whole thought process, maybe earlier on you could have seen it better, but because it's been so long, it's like anything in life, it becomes an automatic kind of habitual way that honestly, it's kind of like almost you start to take kind of the small things, the everyday actual real life for granted. Like you don't even notice it anymore because you're doing that on autopilot mode, because it's just like, I just brush my teeth, I just get ready and off I go. Yeah. And now we're saying, no, let's slow down and let's actually re-notice and reappreciate what that actually says, because it carries a lot of information and data that we've just forgotten to pay attention to, right? And so we're paying so much attention to this piece here. And again, like you said, it's become so automatic that's that difficulty, right? It's like, wait, what? How do I trust this though? This feels weird. It feels strange. Like, what do you mean? Yeah. It's like, I get it, but also it just internally, it's a feeling. It starts to feel off and weird.
Yeah. That's such a great way of putting it. That whole like daily routine that you don't even think about. Like, it just really emphasizes what a big task this is to undo all that you really have to slow down and reevaluate everything you're doing during the day. And it's a lot of work, but most clients are highly motivated to do the work. So,
and what would you say, just for a last question, in general, roughly, because this is a common question as well, like, what would you say is, how long would it take to just kind of somewhat start to get better and see progress?
Yeah, really great question. There's just a huge range there. I would say, since I've been doing it, so it's a really tough thing, because I've had clients that were like new to therapy that did ICBT. I've had clients that did like years of ERP that did ICBT. I've had clients that like found out I was doing ICBT and came back to me to just give it a shot. So the longest client I've had, as far as like since I've learned ICBT, was about a year. And, so we were doing, for anyone who doesn't know, there's one way that people do ICBT is with these 12 modules that were developed by Ardema and O'Connor. And so, we did those 12 modules, and they'll usually be like 1 to 2 to 3 sessions each. And then we took some side steps to work on some other things. And then new obsession came up that really like took over unexpectedly. And we worked on that kind of like from the start again. And so by the time this was all done, it was about a year. And that was, but I feel like that's like a lot of people's experience with ERP as well. Like, you'll see clients that it takes that. And then I've probably had clients that are really doing well from, after like 3 months or so, so that's the range so far I've seen. And I'm sure, but I've got clients that I've got some, 1 or 2 long-term clients. And I think every therapist with OC has some clients that are a little longer term. And we're doing ICBT, and it's a new piece of the puzzle, but it's still hard work too. So
yeah, exactly. I mean, to your point, I think that's exactly right. That's kind of what I found too, generally. And for some folks, it's just you have to take into consideration too, like if there's any kind of like big traumas or losses or other things that could be there that also impact kind of that self-story and self-view that's really entangled in real life stuff that now we have to spend a little extra time to, untangle and kind of come back to retrusting and building up our own, sense of self and so on. But if it's just straight ICBT, it can be that similar. I found like
it can if you've got someone with just pure OCD and no like complicating factor, and what I mean by complicating factor is like perfectionism, throw that in the mix, or very strong disgust response to something, or shame or guilt, anxiety, sensitivity. You can see other things that will complicate things, but just purely OCD from an ICBT perspective, someone comes in and they're inferentially confused, that can go pretty quickly.
Thank you so much for coming on the show and just talking about this kind of more broadly and globally, wrapping our minds around, ICBT therapy these days. And if people would like to find you, how can they find you?
So you can find me online. So OCD Space is the YouTube program that I have. And then I have a website. You can find me, Mike Parker, LCSW. And then I actually just started, I developed a pre-recorded training for ICBT for therapists. So any clinicians out there looking for that, that can be found at ICBTtrainingonline.com. And you'll see like ICBT Training Online, Mike Parker. You can find that.
Perfect. And of course, everything will be in the show notes. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks, Christine. This was fun.